Daf Yomi is being dedicated for Yeshua, Refuah, for all of Klal Yisrael, also Mish Berach for Yafa Dina Bas Chaya Tova. May all the captured soldiers be released at once. May all those who are in need of healing be healed, and may Hashem guard over all of the Chayalei Tzahal. So, one more thing about today's Daf Yomi before we start. Today is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who was the founder of the Daf Yomi. And he gave us, Rabbi Meir Shapiro and his wife had no children, but they gave us so much inspiration. And we are his children. We who study the Daf Yomi, we are his children. And so we're learning today, B'schuto, may his neshama have an aliyah. So we're going to start on top of Daf Ayin. Kiddushin Daf Ayin, a very, very powerful daf with a lot of beautiful stories. So Kiddushin Daf Ayin. So the Gemara tells us that when Ezra went up from Babylon, he brought with him different groups of people. On the top of Ayin Amid Aleph, he brought Geirei v'chirurei. He brought converts and freed soldiers. So Minoan. So the Gemara asks, where do we know that he's bringing converts, not freed soldiers? I was praying for the soldiers and all those in captivity to be freed. But he brought converts and people who have been freed from being a slave. So what's our source for this idea that he brought these people? Amar Afista to Amarkra, the Kohan Nivdal Mitumos, Goyei Aretz, Eleim. That he brought all those Kohan Nivdal Mitumos, Goyei Haaretz, Alehem. He brought all those who had separated from the Tumah of the nations of the land. He also brought mamzerim. How do we know he brought people who were mamzerim? Because it says, "Mino and Dachsev Vayishma Sanvalat Hacharoni Vituvia Ha'eved." He brought and Savlani the Charoni and Tuvia the Eved. The fact that Tuvia was a slave or Tovia the slave, Amoni. So these were not Jewish people, and they heard Viksiv. And then it says next, Ki Rabim Yehuda Balei Shvul. Well, many people in Yehuda had taken an oath to him, ki chatanhu l'Shachanya ben Arach, because he was married into the family of Shechanya ben Arach, and v'Yochanan beno lakach et bat Mishulam ben Barachia. So we see that he was a slave, and yet he married into the Jewish people. And so what happens if a slave or a non-Jew marries into the Jewish people? Also, Kasavar, his other position, that if there's an idolater or a slave who has a relationship with a daughter of with a Jewish girl, the offspring is a mamzer. So the Gemara says, well, not everybody is of that position, that a non-Jew and a Jew creates a mamzer, and a non-Jewish man with a Jewish woman creates a mamzer. According to one who says that the offspring is kosher, how would we understand it? How do we know that these non-Jews and Jews who married in had children? Maybe they didn't have any children. And how do we know that they had these children in Babylon? And then they went up. Maybe they had them in the land of Israel. So, and they didn't go up from Babylon. So this is the source from it. It says, these are the Jews who went up from Tel Melech. Tel Charsha, the rest of the pasuk goes, Tel Charsha Kruv Adon V'imer. That is the pasuk in Nehemiah. So then what does this mean? So we go back to and then the pasuk continues, V'lo yachul agid beit avotam v'zaram im Yisraelhem. And they couldn't say if their offspring were Jewish. So how do we understand this pasuk? How do we tighten it up? Tel Melech, what does that mean? It means that there were children who were in Babylon. This refers to the people whose actions are like the people of Sodom. And the city of Sodom was turned into a mound of salt. What is Tel Charsha? This is a poor offspring who calls to his father and mother, and he says, "Where's my father and mother?" And you quiet him down because they don't want to tell me who his real father is. And they couldn't say their family's identity. They couldn't say if they're Jewish. This refers to an asufi. This refers to a boy who was gathered up from the marketplace, meaning to say that they just found them in the market. Kruv Adon V'imer. Who is that? Amar Rabbi Avo. Amar. This is what it means. Adon Ani. Amar Adon, God said, Ani amarti yu Yisrael fanai chashuvim kekruv. I said that the Jewish people will be as distinguished in front of me like the kruvim. Ve'im samu atzman kinamer, and they made themselves like a leopard. Rashi says, Kechayazu she'ena makpedes bezu chaverta. They're like this animal that doesn't even care who it's with. It's with a spouse of a different animal. Or ikada, meaning to say that the offspring are mamzerim, that they're adulterous. Alternatively, Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Adon, that God said, Afal Pisha Samu Atzman Kinamer, even though they made themselves like leopards, in Chashuvim Lefanai Kekruv. They're placed in front of me like a kruv, like the kruvim. Amar Rabba Barachana Kohen. Let's say Isha She'ena Hogeneslo. Anybody who marries a woman who's not fit for him and who's not appropriate for him, he's as though he made the whole world like they're mute, because it's like he's made the whole world mute. Vizaro melach, and its seed will become like salt that it won't be able to reproduce properly. As it says, "Ve'ela when we tell melach tell harsha," meaning you have to pick wisely and marry the right woman. Amar Rabba bar Rav Ada Amar Rav Kohanos Isha l'shum mamon. Anybody who marries a woman for money, he just marries the girl because she's rich. Havi will banim she'enim mehuganim. You're going to have children that are not appropriate, as it says, Ba'Hashem, Bagdu kivanim zarim yoladu. Because they were treacherous to God because they gave birth to foreign children. B'Shema Tomar Mamon Palat. Maybe he'll say, well, at least he'll be able to save his own money. Says the verse, Talmud Omar Ata Yochem Chodesh Escholkehem, meaning to say that in 1 month all their possessions will be consumed. V'Shema Tomar Chalko v'lo Chalka. Okay, maybe her possessions will be consumed, but not his possessions. Says the verse Chalkehem. Talmud Omar Chalkehem. V'Shema Tomar. Last you say was man meruba. At least they'll have it for a long period of time. Talmud Omar. The verse says Chodesh, in 1 month. My mashma, how do we derive this from here? Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Chodesh nichnas v'chodesh yotza, u'memonam avad. That 1 month comes in, 1 month comes out, and they lose their money. Amar Rabba Bar Avada v'Amrulei Amar Rabbi Sela Amar Rav Hamnuna Kohanos Isha Sheino Oganeslo. Anybody who marries a woman who's not appropriate for him, Elyo Kovto, Elijah the prophet will bind them up. V'Kodesh Baruch Hu wrote so, and God will whip him. V'Tana Al Kulam Elyo Kosev. Or about all of them, Eliyahu writes, meaning to say, what is this a reference to? Rashi says, "My Amar," about that which it says, "Va'azol," my Amar va'azol, about that which it's going to say, "Oilo leposel zaro upogem es mishpachta." Woe to somebody who disqualifies somebody else's seed and says that his family is no good. Meaning to say, he says that you married somebody who's not appropriate for you. About all of them, Eliyahu is going to write, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to sign. HaKadosh Baruch Hu close same. God will sign, woe to somebody who disqualifies his seed, and disqualifies his family, Who knows say Isha Sheino Genis. So when somebody marries a woman that's not appropriate for him, Eliyahu Kovto VaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote. So Elijah will bind him and God will whip him. The Koaposel Pasul. Whoever says about somebody else, you're no good, you're disqualified, you yourself are pasul. Rashi says, Megadev Tamid es mishpachos, somebody who is always cursing the other families, he himself will be disqualified. And the eno medaber b'shivcha, and Rashi says, this person will never talk positively about somebody else. Kol aposel pasul. Whoever disqualifies somebody else, he himself is disqualified. And he never speaks good in general about the world, about people in the world. Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel goes even further and says, "B'mumo posel," that what he says bad about other people, if somebody says bad about something else, he himself has that thing bad. And now we have a very, very interesting story. Ahu Gavra, there was a man named Nardai. He came from Nardai. He went up to the butcher shop in Pumpadisa. Amr, he said to the butcher, "Havu bistro, give me some meat to eat." Amr, the butcher said to him, "Natar adeshaka l'shame de Rabbi Yehuda bar Yecheskel." Wait, I'm serving the attendant of Rabbi Yehuda bar Yecheskel, and after we give him the food, then we'll give it to you. Amar, so he says, Man Yehuda bar Shaviskil, the Kadimli, the Shakal min Kama. He says, instead of this, it was a great rabbi, Yehuda bar Yecheskel, but this disrespectful man, he says, who is this Yehuda bar Shavisko? He called him by like a derogatory name. Rashi says, Lashon Genai, it's a disgusting name. Gargron Ochel, that somebody who's a glutton is called a Shavisko. So he says, who is this Yehuda bar Shavisko who comes before me to eat in front of me? Oslo, they went and they told us to Rav Yehuda, Amru Lego Rav Yehuda. When Rav Yehuda heard how this guy insulted him, Shamte, he excommunicated him. He said, Amru, they said to him, Ragil Dekari Inchi Avde. They said, this guy always calls other people slaves. Achriz Alei de Avde. Rav Yehuda called him a slave. Who was Achriz Alei de Avdehu? Azalahu. So this man went Azmine Ladina. He said he says Rav Yehuda is libeling me. He gave him a hazmana to bring him to a bezdin. L'kamei to Rav Nachman. He wants to bring Rav Yehuda to Rav Nachman. I see piska da hazmana. So he gave him a note to bring him to court. Also Rav Yehuda l'kamei to Rav Huna. So Rav Yehuda said to Rav Huna, goes to Rav Huna. He says, "Do I have to go in front of the bezdin?" Amalei ezel o lo ezel. He said, "Do I have to go?" Amalei mezel o mibayalach. Lamezel mishum de gava rabat. He says, "Really, you don't have to go to Rav Nachman because you're a greater rabbi than him." El Mishum Yikar de Nistia. But Rav Nachman was the son-in-law of the Rosh Kalusa, and he was the Av Bezin. He said, because you have to give honor to the Nasi, i.e., you have to give honor to the Rosh Kalusa, and he's the son-in-law of the Rosh Kalusa, you have to go. Kum Zio, so therefore you have to go. So Yehuda Bar Yecheskel is on his way to Rav Nachman. Also, Ashkechei de Ka'avin Ma'ake. He found Rav Nachman was making a fence. So Rav Yehuda says to him, Amar Rav Yehuda Bar Yecheskel says to him, Amar lo savar amar lo Adam Rav Huna bar Idi Amar Shmuel kivin shenismana Adam parnas al tzibor asher b'asiyas melacha bifnei shlosh. He says, don't you agree with that which we said in the name of Shmuel, that once a person becomes the leader, the parnas of the community, that you're not allowed to do work, you're not allowed to do manual labor in front of three people? Amar le porta de gondoritahu the kavina. He says, I'm making a porta the underneath. He says, I'm making a fence around the roof, but he's saying it in this. He's saying it in what's called a highfalutin language. He's saying it. He's saying it in a highfalutin language. Porta de gundranita. It's a very fancy word. So Rav Yehuda says, Amar nisanya makeh. Why are you not using the language of makeh? That's the language for fence. Tiksiv bo'oraisa. That's what the Torah calls a fence. On mechitza. Or why are you not using the word mechitza to Amar Rabbanan? Why are you speaking like in such a high-falutin way? Amar Yasef Mar our kapita. He says, do you want to sit on the karpita, which is a fancy word for a bench? So Rav Yehuda said, Umis misani savsol. He says to him, why don't you like the word bench? The Amar Rabbanan. That's the rabbi say, oh, it's the or you can use the word it's the Amriyanchi. That's how people talk. Amar le lechol mar etronga. He says. So then Rav Nachman says to him, "Do you want to eat an entroga?" Amar le hachi Amar Shmuel call Omer entroga tilta beramas rucha o etrog kidekaryua rabbanan o etroga the Amriyanchi. He says whoever says an entroga is an arrogant person. You have 1/3 arrogance, meaning you speak in an arrogant manner. Use the word esrog or esroga. Why do you say entroga? Amar le. Then Rav Nachman says lishtemar anabga. He says, do you want to drink some anabga? This is a cup, which is, they used to drink a special cup that they would drink every morning, but there was, again, a highfalutin word for it. He says, misani ispargus, the kari rabbanan, or anpuk, the amri inchi. He says, what's wrong with ispargus that the rabbis use, or an ampuk? This is another language that the people would speak. Amrei, tesi dunag, so he says, then bring me a dunag. Let my daughter come and Tashken and Tashkinan. Let my daughter, whose name was Dunag, let her come and take care of you. Amarle, no. He says, no way. Shmuel taught that we're not allowed to use a little girl to help us. So he says, he says, you're not allowed to use a woman to do these things for you. So he says, Kitani. He says, she's a little girl. It's not a problem. So he says, no, but Pirish Amar Shmuel, you can't use a girl at all. bein gedola, bein ketana, whether she's big or small. So then Rabbi Yehuda says to Rav Nachman, Nishadawei Mar Shalom Yalta. He says, go send regards to your wife, Yalta. Amalei. No, this is what Shmuel taught. Kol Be'isha Erva. He says, no, I can't do that. The sound of a woman is nakedness. So therefore, since the sound of a woman, and if I'm going to say regards to my wife, she's going to respond to me. She's going to answer me. So Rav Nachman says, I'm not going to give your regards to my wife because then she'll answer me, and then you'll hear her, and that's nakedness. So he says, Afshar Ali de Shliach. So he says, so Rav Nachman says, well, actually, Rashi's reading it differently. Rashi says that Rav Nachman was saying to Rabbi Yehuda, should we send regards to Yalta, to my wife? And Rabbi Yehuda responds, no, we're not going to do that because if we do that, if we send regards to Yalta, I'll hear her speaking, and I'm not allowed to hear her. So Rav Nachman says, let's do it through a messenger, so you won't hear it directly from her. Amar Shmuel. So he says, no, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, this is what Shmuel said, Ein Shalom B'Shalom Isha Ayidei Bala, that we're not allowed to send regards to a woman through her husband, because as a result of this, maybe they'll become to be friends with each other, and that'll become inappropriate relationship. So, and Amar Lei, Halchi Amar Shmuel, and indeed this is what Shmuel said, Ein Shalom B'Shalom Isha Klal. So you're not supposed to ask the welfare of a woman at all. So then it's inappropriate. It'll lead to inappropriate relationship. Shalchalei. So then they sent him a message. So Yalta sent a message to Rav Nachman. Shalchalei de Beiso. Sharilei Tigra. So Yalta says to her husband Rav Nachman, get away from him. Meaning to say, leave this guy. Because you should go away from him right away. Meaning to say that we don't want him to basically be embarrassed. We don't want him to look like an ignorant person because he keeps besting you in these verbal exchanges. So Amarle my shiatate demar. So he said, my shiatate demar hacha. He says, what are you doing here? What's the reason why you're here? What's the reason why you came here? Meaning, say what's up? So Rav Nachman means to get rid of your Rav Yehuda. He says, what are you doing here? I'm like Taska das Manusa. So Shadar Mara Basrai. He said, I was given a summons to come before you. So Rav Yehuda says to him, I'm like Hasha Shuta de Mara Gamirna Taska das Manusa Mishadrina Lamar. He says, this person, I don't even understand. I'm not even on your level of speech, but now you're supposed to come before me and I'm supposed to judge you. Apik diska das menusa. So this Rav Yehuda brought out shtar of Dazman. He brought out the summons from his bag. So he brought it out and he showed it to Rav Nachman. He says, here's the summons, and this is the man who summoned me. So he said, well, since you came here, he says, okay, now that you're here, I have to take it seriously so they don't say that the rabbis are flattering each other. So he says, why did you excommunicate this person? Tzir shlichei d'Rabbanan. He says, because the reason why I excommunicated him is because he was disrespectful to one of the agents of the rabbis. So he says, well, if that's the case, vinate mar, that you shouldn't have excommunicated him. You should have given him lashes. The Rav got mangin on mandam mitzar shluchei d'Rabbanan. Rav used to give lashes to somebody who was disrespectful to the rabbis. So he said, the adif minei avdilei. He said, no, I did something I gave him even a harsher punishment. And then he says, my time echraz marawei da avdu. Why did you make a proclamation that this man was a slave? Because he always called other people slaves. Vitani and Shmuel taught ko apostle pasul. However, whoever is disrespectful to whoever makes a claim about somebody else, if they're disqualified, they themselves are disqualified. And they never speak appropriately about other people. But Amar Shmuel b'mumo posel, and Shmuel says the exact same thing that he says about other people, they themselves have. So the Gemara says, Amar Damar Shmuel, so Rav Nachman said, yeah, well, Shmuel was saying we should be concerned about him, but to actually make a proclamation that he's a real Evet, that he wasn't saying me Amar. In the meantime, this man came who Rav Yehuda was having the fight with. Amaru Ahu Bar Dina Rav Yehuda. So then this man said, Ahu Bar Dina, he says, Rav Yehuda Lididi Karisli Avda Dasina Mibase Chashmonai. So then, in the meantime, this guy came, and this guy said, hold on one second. So he says, hold on one second. So this guy said to Rabbi Yehuda, he said, you called me a slave because you said, because I came from the house of the Hasmoneans. And Rabbi Yehuda said, yeah, because this is what Shmuel taught. Whoever says I came from the Chashmonaim is actually a slave. Rashi says the reason why is because all of their seed was killed by Hordos, and Hordos was a slave, and he ruled over them, and he called his children and said that they were Chashmonaims. And as a baseline, it must be that the daughters of the Jews did not marry because they wouldn't have married to slaves. So anybody who says they're Hasmonean, it's a proof that they're a slave. Amarle, several Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Kol Talmid Chacham Shemura Halacha Uva in Kodem Ma'isa Amar Shomim Lo V'Imlav Ein Shomim Lo. Yeah, you're saying that you have this teaching from Shmuel, and whoever says they came from the Hasmoneans is a slave. But we have another teaching that if you're in the middle of a fight and then you pull up this incident, we only believe you if you said this before the fight. But now you're making this claim after you're already in the fight with us, so we don't believe you. I'm right. So Rabbi Yehuda said, wait, Rav Masna the Kai Kavasi. He said, no, I have a teaching from Rav Masna who said just like me. Rav Masna lo chazi nardai twice. He says basically I have corroborating evidence from Rav Masna. Rav Masna had not been in Nardai for 13 years. Who Yoma, so that day happened to come. Amoi Dachir Mar Mayam or Shmuel. So then Rabbi Yehuda says to him, do you remember what Shmuel said? When he had one foot on the banks of the river and one foot still on the bridge. Amoi Hachi Amar Shmuel called Amar Midibes Chashmonai Malka Kasina Avdu. Dulo Ishtiver Mineu Alahi Rabisa. The Salko Igra Viram Yakala Amar called Amar Midibes Chashmonai Ana Avdu. And Nafa Me Igro Mesa. So he says, because whoever, he said, so Ramas indeed remembered this. He said, whoever says I'm from the Chashmonayim is indeed going to be considered like they are a slave, because the only person who remained from the Chashmonayim was this one girl, and she ran up to the roof, and whoever says they're from the Chashmonayim is a slave, and she fell from the roof and died. And so indeed, Rabbi Yehuda said that this guy, that Rav Nachman says that this guy who was starting up with Rabbi Yehuda, he himself was a slave. They declared it that day a slave. Hu Yoma, that day, Ikar and Kama Ksuva Benardai. That day they ripped up several ksuvos in Nardai, because from that family they said all these people are slaves. We don't have to pay them the ksuva.
But he still brought it up in the middle.
What?
He still brought it up in the middle. I mean, okay, so there's another source that they're from the Hashmonim, but he still brought it up in the middle, not beforehand.
No, but he had a source that it was before him. This other rabbi came and testified. I heard this teaching from Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda was no longer testifying. Rabbi Masna came and testified. I had heard it from Shmuel. So therefore, they weren't relying on Rabbi Yehuda's testimony. Kikanafik. So when Rabbi Yehuda was leaving the Bezdin with Rav Nachman, Nafik Abbas Regel Mirgame, they didn't like what he was doing. So the people from Nardai were coming after him to stone him to death because they didn't like what he did. So he said, Amrlu Ishasiku Shasiku. He said, if you'll be quiet, I'm not going to say anything. Be low, but if you're going to keep trying to kill me, Magrina Laichu, I'm going to tell the world which one of you come from those families. Magrina Laichu Adam Shmuel, I'm going to tell you what Shmuel said. Tarta Zarisa Ika Benardai. There are three types of families in Nardai. Chada Mikirya Debe Yona. One comes from the basically from the house of the dove. The Chada Mikirya Debay or Visa, and the other one comes from the raven. One comes from the house. There are two families in Ardai. One comes from the house of the dove, and one comes from the house of the raven. The Simanech, and the way we know who is who, and how do we know who is who? Hold on. Tame, tahor, tahor. That the raven, and this was from yesterday's parsha, we say about the raven, we say is tame, tame, and the one after the dove is called tahor, tahor. So basically, he's saying that, and that's how we know. So Rabbi Yehuda wasn't saying. So Marsha says Rabbi Yehuda wasn't saying this, that there was that the dove family was okay and the ravens weren't. That the Gemara is telling us afterwards. Shajuahu rigma miyadayo. They dropped the stones from their hands. Amta benahar malka, and then they threw them into. And what happened was they threw so many stones down that the Nahar Malka made a dam. Machriz Rav Yehuda b'Pumpadisa. Rav Yehuda made a proclamation. Pumpadisa. Ad of Yonasan Avdi. Ad and Yonasan are slaves. Yehuda bar Papa Mamzeri. Bati bar Tuvia b'Ramas Ruchel o Shakal Gita. And Yehuda, the son of Papa, is a Mamzer. And then we say that Bati bar Tuvi was so arrogant, he didn't even want to accept the get, the document of emancipation, because he said, I don't want to admit that I'm a slave. Machriz. And the next case was Machriz Rabbi Mechuza. So what happened was Rava made a declaration in Mechuza, Bawei Danai, Talei Mawei Zagai, Kulam Lipsol, that all these 5 families are disqualified from marrying into the Jewish people. The Bawei Danai, Talei Mawei Zagai. Amar Rav Yehuda, Guvai, Givoni, the people of from Guvai are Givonim. Duranisa, Darei Sinai. The people from Duranisa are Darei Nisina, which means the towns of the Nisim. Amar Rav Yosef, Haibe Kubi de Pimpadisa Kulam Avdi. So he says, Rav Yosef says these people from the Kubi of Pimpadisa are all slaves. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmul, Arba Meas Avadim. There are 400 slaves. Amrle Arbas Alafim Avadim, 4,000 slaves. Haylo Fishkar ben Amar. To Pishkar ben Amar. V'kula Nitmu B'kuhuna. And all of them became all of them became nitmu'u with the kahuna. Meaning to say, Rashi says, nidmu'u nasu banos kohanim. They all intermarried with the daughters of the kohanim. Shayu machzikin atzman b'kohanim. They were proclaiming their kohanim. B'toch shayu ochim truma, because they were eating truma because they were the slaves of the kohanim. Because the slave of a kohen is considered kinyan kasbo. He can eat the truma. And so that's what they were doing. And then v'kol kohen sheish bo azus panim enu elamehem. Any kohen who has arrogance comes from them, because normally the kohanim are not arrogant. So if you want to know who's a kohen who's arrogant, it's these fake kohanim that came from this family. There are 4,000 or 400 of them. If you ever meet a kohen who's arrogant, he's for sure from them. All of them sat in the front row of Nardai, means say they passed themselves off as these kohanim. But this is a different approach from Rebbe Lazar, who says that if you see a Kohen with arrogance, don't assume he's not a Kohen, because it says in the pasuk, that your people are like the people who fight from the Kohanim. So whoever marries a woman who's not appropriate for him, when God is going to bring down the Shekhinah and he's going to testify about who's from the Jewish people, God is not going to testify about this person. Shenemar Shiftei Ka Edus Yisrael. That these are the tribes of God, testimony to Israel. When will be a testimony to the Jewish people? Meaning to say, when is going to testify that these Jewish people are his? When is that going to be? When the tribes are the tribes of God. So God shows his Shekhinah, when he rests his Shekhinah, he only puts his Shekhinah on the most distinguished families of Israel. As it says, at that time, God says, I will be the God for all the families of Israel. Not for all of Israel, only for those families that are the distinguished ones. And they will be for me as a nation. So he says this is one of the attributes between the Jews and the nations of the world. How so? By the Jewish people, it says in Yechezkel, I will be for them as a God, and they will be for me as a nation. And Amarab Barafuna, so what I'm saying that they will be Gerim, but by those who are the converts, it says Miuzeh, who is this person? Who is this person? Areves libo lageshes elayin umashem. Meaning to say, but it doesn't say and who is this person? And it doesn't say about them. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, B'Yisrael, by the Jewish people, it says, Vayisi Lam Le'Elokim. I bring for them as a God, even though even though they are not for me as a nation, but because I'll bring them close, they'll be for as a nation. They will be close to me as a nation. But by the converts, it doesn't say that God is going to bring them close from the heaven unless they come close on their own. They have to be good on their own. To convert, somebody needs to be good on their own, and then Hashem will bring them close. But somebody who's a Jewish person from birth, Hashem is going to bring them close. And here we have a very powerful statement that Amar Rabbi Chalbo, Kashem Gerim Lishol Kesapachas, that the converts are very difficult for the Jewish people, like a scab. As it states, V'nilva ger aleim, as it states in the pasuk, V'nilva ger aleim v'nispechu al beis Yaakov. So let's see what Rashi says about that. What does it mean that converts are difficult for the Jewish people, like a scab? So the Gemara tells us, Rashi says, She'enim zirim b'mitzvos, because the converts aren't careful about mitzvos, and the people who come to them are going to learn from them, and they're going to learn not to be careful with their mitzvahs. Tosfos gives a different explanation. Tosfos says, Yesh mefarshim, that what does this mean? V'yesh mefarshim l'fi kol Yisrael haraven zeh b'zeh. Is all the Jewish people are connected, and so he says we don't accept that approach. And then Tosfos gives another explanation. V'yesh mefarshim the kashin gerim le'yisrael kesapachas l'fi shehizir hakadosh baruch hu mekaftal mekomos shelo lahonos osam, because Hashem warned the Jewish people in 24 places not to torture, not to be mean to the converts. And it's impossible that you're not going to be a little mean to somebody who's converted. You know, you're mean to everybody. People don't always act properly. And so therefore it's going to be bad for the Jews, the people who are born Jewish, because you might, God forbid, cause pain to somebody who converted. Another approach is, why is it that the Jewish people why are the converts to the Jewish people like a scab? It's because of the converts that the Jewish people are in exile. Why are the Jewish people in exile? Like it states, why are the Jewish people spread around the whole world? Tosfos says, so that we could get more converts. That's another approach. The only reason why we're in exile is to get more converts. V'loni here, Tosfos says, I don't like that because we're supposed to dissuade the Jewish people from converting. So now another approach. This is 71a. The Tosfos on 71a says, Rav Avram Ger, so this is Rav Avram the convert. Never seen him quoted in Tosfos before, but maybe he is. You have to check if he's quoted anywhere else, but I never saw him. He says, Pirish Ofisha Gerim Bekiim b'mitzvos, because the converts are Bekiim, they're experts in the mitzvos. Umidaktikim b'hem. And they're more careful in the mitzvos. So therefore, Kashem Hem Yisrael Kisapachas. They're difficult for the Jewish people like a scab. To be Tokach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mazkir Avon Osem Shal Yisrael, V'shein Rotzin Ritzono. And as a result of this, Hashem Yisbarach is said the converts keep the mitzvahs. Why don't the Jewish people keep the mitzvahs like them? And so therefore, it's hard for Jewish people like a scab. All right, we'll stop here. Everybody should have a shkoyach, a good day, a shkoyach to everybody.